Jack Doyle hadn't even finished unpacking when the first warning came. It wasn't a friendly wave or a welcome basket. It was a folded letter taped to his door, printed in bold font, signed Karen Litchfield, HOA, President. Reminder: excessive noise, including barking, is a violation of Cedar Creek Estates community policy. Jack read it twice, then looked down at Boomer, Duke, and Tilly, his 3 aging but loyal bloodhounds. They were sprawled in the front yard, tongues out, watching a squirrel with polite disinterest. Jack chuckled. They've barked less than the movers did. He brushed it off. But it was just the beginning. Karen Litchfield had been president of the HOA for 6 years. She treated the community like a private kingdom, timed sprinkler inspections, issued citations for crooked mailboxes, and once fined a teenager for painting his bike red without color palette approval. She called herself a steward of standards. Jack called her something else. Things escalated fast. Within the first 10 days, Jack received 3 more notices, 2 for excessive noise and 1 for unauthorized lawn decoration, referring to a garden gnome his late wife had loved. On the 11th day, Karen showed up in person. She wore a pastel blouse and navy slacks, carried a clipboard, and smiled like she practiced it in the mirror. Behind her were 2 other HOA board members, quiet, uncomfortable, watching like they were there for moral support. "We have a problem," she said, skipping introductions. "Your dogs are a disruption. Cedar Creek has expectations. Bark, digging, unsightly activity. None of that fits our image." Jack leaned against his fence. "They're quiet unless someone's sneaking around." Karen blinked. "That's not funny. I wasn't joking." She stiffened. "We'll be fining you until corrective action is taken, and if this continues, we'll be forced to escalate. We've removed aggressive animals before." Boomer let out a soft growl. Karen stepped back. "You've been warned." Jack watched. He didn't argue, but something in her tone wasn't right. It wasn't about dogs. It felt ... personal. That night, things got weirder. At 2:13 a.m., Duke began barking sharp, urgent. Jack grabbed a flashlight and followed him out. Tilly and Boomer joined, pulling him toward the property line where his fence met Karen's. All 3 dogs stopped near a patch of azaleas and began digging furiously. Jack knelt and swept the dirt aside. Something plastic reflected the beam of his flashlight. He reached in and pulled out a torn Ziploc bag. Inside were several crumpled papers. Most were faded receipts, best control, landscaping, and a large payment labeled emergency sanitation non-disclosed source. The vendor listed was Claybrook Solutions LLC. Jack searched the name online. Nothing. No business license. No reviews. Just one red flag after another. He dried the papers and hid them behind a panel in his garden shed. The next morning, the bag was gone. Dug up, removed, the hole had been filled in neatly, like nothing ever happened. Later that day, a different letter appeared in Jack's mailbox. No envelope, no return address. Just one line written in sharp, all-capital letters. "Stay out of it. Dogs can disappear too." Jack didn't show alarm, but inside he was boiling. He knew threats. He'd faced fire, flood, and desperate people, but this was different. This was rot under a polished surface. A neighbor who smiled at barbecues while hiding skeletons behind HOA bylaws. That evening, he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. Duke lay beside him, staring across the yard. Boomer paced. Tilly's ears were up, eyes fixed on Karen's upstairs window, and there, barely visible, a movement. A flick of a curtain. Someone was watching, but the dogs weren't afraid. They were alert, on guard. And when Tilly gave that low, rolling growl, Jack knew this wasn't just about barking. It was a warning. The hounds sensed something. Something buried. Jack had a choice. Back down and play nice, or dig deeper and find out what Karen was hiding. But he already knew what he was going to do. He was going to let the dogs lead the way. What he didn't know was that the truth they were about to uncover would turn the whole neighborhood upside down. And Karen, she wasn't just any HOA president. She was something else entirely. Jack didn't sleep much. That night, the note had been burned into his mind. Dogs can disappear, too. He wasn't worried about himself. He was worried about his hounds. Boomer, Duke, and Tilly weren't just loyal. They were smart. And whatever Karen was hiding, they had already sniffed it out. By sunrise, Jack had a plan. He brewed coffee, fed the dogs, and opened his dusty lockbox of old tools and gear. From the bottom, he pulled out a small trail camera, one he used back in his search and rescue days. It was weatherproof, infrared, motion-activated, and nearly invisible when mounted in the trees. By mid-morning, the camera was in place, nestled between 2 branches overlooking the edge of Karen's property line. Jack set it to record the full night. The next 2 days were quiet. Karen didn't show up, didn't send another letter. No knocks on the door. But Jack noticed something strange. The trash bins at the far end of Karen's yard kept shifting positions. One day they were at the curb, the next, pulled around the side of the house. Then back again, except one of them wasn't a trash bin. It was a compost barrel, and the dogs didn't like it one bit. Tilly wouldn't go near it. Boomer barked when the wind blew from that direction, and Duke come even out a deep growl and paced between the fence and the porch for nearly 10 minutes. Jack waited until midnight. Then he retrieved the camera. The footage wasn't what he expected. At 3:14 a.m., a figure appeared from Karen's back door. Not in pajamas or slippers but dark clothes. Hood up, carrying a small duffel bag. The person crept across the lawn, opened the compost barrel, and dropped something inside. Not trash, not food waste, papers. Several thick stacks, sealed in plastic. The figure turned. The face was blurry, but the posture, the hair, the height, it was Karen, or someone trying hard to look like her. Jack paused the video and zoomed. There was a key detail just visible as silver charm, bracelet on the left wrist. He'd seen it before. Karen wore it at the last HOA meeting. Jack leaned back, heart thudding. Something was being hidden, and it wasn't pet-related complaints. The next day, Jack drove into town and met with someone he trusted, Mike Carmichael, a retired police officer turned private investigator. Mike had helped Jack once before, after a shady contractor tried to scam him after a fire. Jack handed over the video and the copied receipts. Karen Litchfield, Mike repeated, tapping the paper. I know that name. You should, Jack said. She's practically mayor of Cedar Creek. Mike opened his laptop and began digging. They found something strange within minutes. Karen Litchfield didn't exist before 2018. No online presence. No property records. No prior addresses. Just one real estate transaction, her house in Cedar Creek. That's when Mike frowned. There's a reason this looked familiar, he said. She changed her name. He pulled up an archived news article from a suburban newsletter in another state. It was 8 years old. Headline: Procurement official Karen Monroe resigns amid budget scandal. There was a photo. The same face. Shorter hair, but unmistakable. She'd been fired after a hush-hush city audit exposed missing funds and a web of fake vendor payments. Charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. Then she vanished on until now. Jack stared at the screen. She's doing it again. Looks like it, Mike said. And the HOA is her cover. Jack left Mike's office with a flash drive full of records, and his head spinning. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor or power-tripping HOA president. She was running a shell game again, and Cedar Creek was her new playground. Back home, he found a small package on his porch. No address. No name, just a brown paper envelope. Inside were photos. Blurry, black and white security cam stills of Jack's backyard, of his dogs, of him, and on one of them, a red X had been drawn across Duke's face. Jack's jaw tightened. His hands didn't shake, but his voice did when he said, "All right, lady, you just made this personal." The dogs were restless that night, pacing the fence line again. Around 1 a.m., Jack followed them into the yard. That's when Duke stopped cold nose to the ground, and barked 3 times. Sharp and deep. Jack grabbed a shovel. He didn't know what they were about to find, but he knew it was buried, and he knew it didn't want to be found because when they started to dig, the ground wasn't just loose, it had already been disturbed. The earth near Karen's fence wasn't just soft, it had a strange smell. Not fresh dirt, not compost. Something sour, something chemical. Jack didn't say a word. He just kept digging. Duke circled, sniffing low. Boomer let out a sharp bark. Tilly stood by the porch, alert but still as if something had frozen her to the ground. Jack's shovel struck plastic. He dropped to one knee, brushed away the soil, and uncovered the corner of a black contractor bag. He hesitated, then pulled. It freed. It wasn't heavy, but it was sealed tight. Back inside, under the glow of his garage light, Jack carefully cut the bag open. Inside were several layers of shrink-wrapped files. They looked like invoices, dozens of them, along with 2 prepaid cell phones and a small leather notebook. The writing inside was neat and deliberate. Pages filled with dates, initials, payment amounts, and vague descriptions. Cleanup, inspection, silence, bonus. Jack flipped to the last page. 3 names were circled in red ink. The first was Karen Monroe. The second, a man named Leo Withersvice, president of the HOA. The third was Jack's own name. Next to it, new dog guy, could ruin everything. He sat down hard on the workbench stool. It wasn't just paranoia. Karen knew he was digging, and she wasn't working alone. Jack scanned one of the invoices. The company name was different from the last fake business. This time it was Granite Asset Services. He pulled out his laptop. The website was polished but hollow. No employees listed. No business hours. Just a contact form that didn't work. Another shell company. And all this was being run from behind the white picket fences of Cedar Creek Estates. The next morning, Jack dropped the kids, his dogs, off with an old rescue buddy just outside town. He didn't want them in the line of fire. Not now. By midday, he was back at Mike Carmichael's office. Mike read through the notebook slowly, then rubbed his jaw. This is more than HOA fraud. This is coordinated laundering, possibly extortion. Jack raised an eyebrow. Extortion. Mike nodded. Look at this note. Landon won't sign until wife sees proof. That's not about landscaping. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old city audit file. 8 years ago, Karen Monroe got caught moving city funds to contractors who didn't exist. Some of the money reappeared in private accounts. Offshore, they never found where the rest. When Jack tapped the notebook, I think we just did. Back at Cedar Creek, the neighborhood looked the same. Sprinklers arced across manicured lawns. Kids played basketball in the cul-de-sac. Nothing looked out of place. But Jack could feel it in the air. Something had shifted. He parked his truck, stepped out and noticed a small blue car idling near the curb. A man in sunglasses was inside, pretending to look at a phone. But when Jack moved, the man pulled away, slow and casual. He wasn't a neighbor. Jack went inside. Minutes later, his doorbell rang. It was Leo Withers. The HOA vice president looked uneasy, holding a clipboard that shook slightly in his hands. We're following up on a few member compliance items, Leo said, not meeting Jack's eyes, just routine. Jack said nothing. Leo glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in. You didn't hear this from me, but Karen knows you've been poking around. She's not happy. Karen's never happy, Jack muttered. No, Leo said. This is different. She's scared. Jack narrowed his eyes. Scared of what? Leo stepped back. That you'll find what's in the tunnel, Jack. Froze what tunnel? But Leo was already walking away. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He replayed Leo's words. Tunnel. What tunnel? Around midnight, he heard a Duke's low bark, followed by Boomer's anxious pacing. Jack grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. Tilly was staring toward the back of the property. Her nose was pressed to a patch of grass just beyond the fence. Not by Karen's house but behind the old HOA maintenance shed. It was a forgotten corner of the neighborhood, overgrown with weeds and vines. The dogs had never gone near it before. Until now, Jack followed. He cleared the brush and found what looked like a buried hatch. Rusted, half covered in dirt, with an old padlock snapped. Shut. He pulled. It didn't budge. But Tilly started whining and then, with a low grumble, the ground near the edge gave way just a little. Beneath the shed was air. Jack didn't know how deep it went, or who built it, but he knew what he had to do next, because whatever Karen was hiding, whatever had made her change her name, fake businesses, and threaten him wasn't just financial, it was physical, and it was buried under Cedar Creek. Jack returned the next morning with bolt cutters, gloves, and Duke, riding shotgun. The others had been dropped off with Mike's daughter for the day. Jack didn't want to risk it, not until he knew what was down there. The rusted padlock snapped clean after 2 good squeezes. The hatch creaked open, releasing a stale, chemical breeze. It smelled like mold, dust, and something else acrid metallic. Duke whimpered softly. Jack pointed his flashlight down into the darkness. A wooden ladder led about 10 feet into the earth. Below was a concrete floor, partially flooded. Pipes ran along the walls, mold corroded. This wasn't a bunker. It looked more like an abandoned utility tunnel, but it had been repurposed. He climbed down slowly. His boots splashed into a shallow pool of water. The flashlight cut a narrow beam ahead. He moved forward, careful with each step. The tunnel stretched out maybe 30 feet, curving slightly to the right. That's when he saw them. Plastic containers, 4 of them stacked neatly. In a corner, each labeled archive in thick red marker. Jack opened the first files, dozens of them. All HOA-related meeting notes, bank statements, vendor approvals. Some marked confidential, some stamped with dates that didn't match any of the official HOA newsletters. Then he found the 5th bin. This one was different. Inside was a bundle of sealed envelopes, every single one addressed to someone in Cedar Creek, and every envelope included copies of personal documents, medical bills, mortgage statements, private texts. Jack pulled one labeled N. He knew that name. Nora Lotman was the PTA president. She once mentioned her husband nearly lost their home to debt collectors, but the HOA had mysteriously waived their late fees around the same time. Jack flipped through the rest. These weren't just private files, they were leveraged. Blackmail. Karen had been digging into residents' lives, finding pressure points, and using them to maintain control. And now, Jack had the receipts. He snapped photos of everything. As he turned to leave, Duke started growling. At first, Jack thought it was the dark, or the cold water, or maybe a raccoon, but then he heard it too. A faint metallic click. He turned. There, at the far end of the tunnel, a door had silently swung open. Not a hatch, a real door. Steel, thick, and inside it, a small, dimly lit room. Jack hesitated, then stepped closer. The walls were covered with maps, property maps, blueprints of homes around Cedar Creek. Most were marked in red ink with weird symbols and coded notes. There were printed photos, some of children walking to school, others of families at the neighborhood pool. None of them should have existed. And in the center of the room, a corkboard. It was a web of photos and strings connecting faces to documents. At the center was a headshot of Karen underneath her current name, but right next to it was another photo. Mike Carmichael. And next to Mike, Jack Doyle. Someone had been planning something, watching them all, gathering files, creating leverage, and it didn't look like Karen was working alone anymore. Jack backed out of the room, heart pounding. He climbed out fast, secured the hatch, and got in his truck with Duke. Back home, he barely made it through the door when his phone rang. It was Mike. Jack, Mike said, "We've got a problem." "I know," Jack said. "I just found it." "No," Mike replied, voice low and tight. "I mean now. Someone broke into my office this morning, took the hard drive, smashed the backup, and left a note on my desk." Jack felt his chest tighten. "What did it say?" "Same thing you got." but worse. You open the door, you get buried in it. That evening, Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photos and files he'd managed to save. His dogs were back at his feet, tense but quiet. He knew Karen was dangerous, but now, she was organized, and she wasn't alone, because one of the names on the corkboard was Leo Withers, the same Leo who had warned Jack just days earlier. Jack didn't wait until morning. He couldn't. He spent the next 3 hours scanning every document he had pulled from the tunnel HOA bank records, private letters, and the corkboard photos. He backed them up on 3 flash drives, sealed them in envelopes, and labeled them with names he trusted. Mike, his cousin in law enforcement, a journalist friend who owed him a favor. He didn't trust the cloud. Not now. Not when Karen's network had proven it could breach offices, track movements, and erase traces. Before sunrise, Jack took the dogs for a drive. Not through the neighborhood, but into the hills. There, in a shaded clearing, he buried one of the drives in a waterproof case, beneath a flat rock. It wasn't high-tech, but it was hidden. Back at the house, he sent a simple message to Mike. If I go dark, tell Nora Lopeman to check under the birdbath at 26 Elm Grove. You'll know why. Then he went home, showered, and got dressed like it was a normal Saturday, but nothing about the day ahead would be normal. At 11 a.m., Jack called for an emergency HOA meeting. He invoked Article 7.3 of the Charter member rights to present grievances and posted flyers across the community bulletin boards. Karen couldn't block it, and if she tried, it would only look worse. By 2 p.m., over 30 residents had gathered near the community center. Some brought lawn chairs, others came with suspicion on their faces, ready to hear what the dog man had to say. Karen showed up 10 minutes late, wearing her power pink blazer and a frozen smile. She brought Leo Withers with her. Jack's stomach turned. Leo stood quietly behind her, not making eye contact. Just before Jack stepped forward, Duke let out a low, quiet growl. Jack cleared his throat. I moved here 3 months ago, he began, his voice steady. I wanted peace. What I found instead was a nest of lies. A few people exchanged glances. Karen crossed her arms. Doc continued. I've discovered records hidden beneath the HOA shed. Financial documents, backroom payments, ghost vendors, and more than that, files on you, on your families, on your homes. He paused, letting it sink in. Karen Monroe, he said, using her former name, ran a similar scam in another state. She changed her identity and started over here, using our HOA to create fake companies and reroute your dues into private accounts. Karen opened her mouth to interrupt, but Jack held up a photo. This is her mugshot. From 2015. City procurement, front. Gasps rippled through the crowd, then Jack turned toward Leo. And this man or vice president helped her, either by fear or by choice. Leo's face twitched. He opened his mouth. I didn't. He stammered, but Karen shot him a look. Bad froze the words in his throat. Jack stepped forward and held up a flash drive. This contains everything: documents, bank statements, surveillance footage. It's been distributed to a reporter, law enforcement, and a federal contact. So if anything happens to me or my dogs, it won't stop the truth from coming out. Karen didn't move. She stared at him like a statue, calculating. She hadn't expected this. Not so fast. Not so public. Then came the voice from the crowd. You used my medical debt against me, Nora Lopeman said. You told me if I didn't vote yes on the budget change, you'd let the insurance company know about my daughter's condition. Karen blinked, stunned, silent. Another neighbor chimed in, then another. Suddenly, stories came pouring out: quiet suspicions, unexplained lenience, whispered threats disguised as neighborly advice. Karen stepped back. I don't know what this man told you, she began, her voice trembling with false indignation, but these are lies. Conspiracies? He's fabricating documents, Boomer barked sharply, interrupting her. Duke paced forward, and then Tilly lunged toward Karen and began pawing at her ankle. Karen screamed, pulling away, but something dropped from her pants legs, something she tried to catch midair, a burner. Phone. It clattered on the concrete. Jack picked it up and unlocked the screen. No password. The most recent text message read, clean up the safe house. He's getting close. The crowd fell silent. Karen ran not fervently to the parking lot, fumbling with her car keys. But Jack didn't chase her because he didn't have to. The sheriff's vehicle pulled in just in time. Mike stepped out, flanked by 2 deputies. He didn't say a word, just nodded at Jack. Then turned toward Karen. You're under arrest for obstruction, fraud, and misuse of funds. You have the right to remain silent. She didn't remain silent. She screamed at Jack, at Leo, at the world, but no one listened. She was done. Or so Jack thought, because that night, his security camera pinged. The feed showed someone approaching his garage. Not Karen, not Leo, someone he didn't recognize. And this time they were carrying a shovel. Jack watched the figure on the camera with his heart pounding. It was 2:41 a.m. The grainy footage showed a tall man in a hooded jacket moving across the side of his garage. He wasn't stumbling like a drunk teen or wandering lost. He was precise, intentional, in his hand, a long-handled shovel. He moved toward the spot where Jack had planted a young maple tree the year before, coincidentally, just 10 feet from the hidden panel in the garden shed where Jack had once stashed the copied files. The man knelt, dug quickly, checked something on his phone, then froze, his face tilting directly toward the trail camera. Just a glint of his eyes, no expression. Then he stood, left the hole half dug, and walked away. Not fast, not scared, like he was making a point. Jack replayed the footage twice. Whoever that was. They weren't part of Karen's known circle. He called Mike. Mike answered groggily. "If this isn't about coffee or dogs, I'm going to hang up." "Jack," explained Dot. By the time he finished, Mike was wide awake. "I've seen him," Mike said. "He was in one of the HOA photos from the tunnel, but no ID, no record. We thought he was just a hired hand." "Hired by who?" "I don't think Karen was the boss," Mike said. "I think she was just the local face. This guy, he's something else. The financials go deeper. Offshore wires, multiple properties. Karen ran the front. He cleaned up the back." Jack's stomach tightened. The arrest hadn't shut the operation down. It just exposed the tip of something far larger. Later that morning, Jack returned to the garden. The maple tree was untouched, but the spot the man had dug, it held something small buried inches deep, a wooden matchbox. Inside it was a single SIM card. Jack didn't open it at home. He drove an hour into the city and used a prepaid burner phone Mike gave him. When he inserted the card, the phone vibrated. There were 2 messages. One was a photo and aerial view of his backyard. The other was a simple line of text. "This isn't about the HOA. Walk away." He powered the phone down and smashed it on the asphalt. By the time he returned home, Mike had news. One of the ghost vendors used in Karen's files, Claybrook Solutions, had shown up in a federal investigation 6 years ago, tied to an environmental cleanup scam in Oklahoma. Another Granite Asset Services was flagged in a Treasury Department watch list, suspected of laundering money through real estate. Jack sat back in his chair, stunned. "What does Cedar Creek have to do with that?" he asked. "It's not about the HOA," Mike said. "It's about the land." Mike pulled up a county zoning map. 3 months ago, a proposal was quietly submitted to rezone part of Cedar Creek's greenbelt as mixed-use commercial. The same land the HOA claimed was protected community property. Karen had signed the proposal. If it passed, the land would be sold. Fast, quietly. The money would flow through Karen's fake vendors, and then disappear. That's why they were so desperate to keep people quiet. That's why they watched Jack. That night, Jack didn't sleep at home. He left the dogs with a neighbor, and drove to the edge of the greenbelt. There was a narrow path between the trees, ones used by joggers, now overgrown. Near the trail's end, he found a row of orange survey flags. Freshly planted, bright and clean, they'd already begun marking the land. A sound broke the silence, leaves crunching. Jack turned. The man from the camera stood 15 feet away. Same hood, same shovel. No fear in his stance. "You've made things messy," he said. His voice was low, almost bored. "You should have kept walking your dogs. That was your role." Jack didn't move. The man continued. "Now they'll come clean up. Not just here. Anywhere you go." He dropped a folded piece of paper on the ground and turned back into the trees. Jack waited, counted 30 seconds, then picked it up. It was a list. 3 names. His, Mike, single quotes, S, and Nora Lotman's, underneath. 1 sentence. "Targets under observation. Begin phase 2. Jack drove straight to Mike's. They spent the next 4 hours calling contacts, reporters, attorneys, state auditors. They knew now what this was. A land laundering scheme, masked by HOA rules and small-town silence. Jack had poked the beast. And now the beast was circling. Jack Doyle wasn't about to back down. If the threats meant anything, they meant one thing. The people behind the scheme were desperate and dangerous. That morning, Jack gathered Boomer, Duke, and Tilly, along with Mike and Nora Lotman, together. They crafted a plan. First, they would document everything: footage from the security cameras, recorded conversations, and detailed logs of suspicious activity. They knew Karen was out of the picture, but her shadow on, the shadow of whoever was really pulling the strings, still loomed. Second, they would call a community meeting, not just for Cedar Creek, but for the neighboring developments. If the land was at risk, it wasn't just Jack's backyard, it was everyone's future. Jack's dogs, trained for more than companionship, sensed the urgency. Duke sniffed out people's movements around the neighborhood. Boomer stayed alert for strange vehicles, and Tilly's sharp ears caught whispered conversations. Within days, Jack's phone started ringing. Neighbors came forward with stories of unusual inspections, unexplained utility work, and unfamiliar workers surveying properties in the dead of night. The news spread like wildfire at the big community hall. Jack stood in front of an audience, twice the size of any HOA meeting before. Faces were wary, tired, but curious. He laid out the evidence: fake companies funneling money, forged documents, secret tunnels beneath the neighborhood, and the land grab disguised as a routine zoning change. Karen was just the tip of the iceberg, Jack said, and the real threat isn't HOA rules, it's greed. A murmur ran through the crowd. Then came the moment no one expected. A man in a business suit stepped forward from the back. "My name is Richard Owens," he said, voice steady. "I'm with the state attorney's office." He held up a file, thick with papers. "We've been investigating a series of land scams connected to Cedar Creek and several other developments statewide. Thanks to an anonymous tip and extensive investigation, this ring is about to be dismantled." The crowd erupted in applause. Jack felt a weight lift, but not completely. He knew the fight wasn't over. That night, Jack sat on his porch with the dogs. The neighborhood was quiet, but the tension lingered. Suddenly, Duke's ears perked. He rose slowly, growling softly. Jack followed Duke's gaze to the dark end of the street, where headlights flickered. 2 black SUVs rolled to a stop. Men stepped out wearing suits, but moving like soldiers. Jack's heart pounded. The dogs were ready. The next 48 hours were a blur. Authorities raided several properties. Fake vendors were exposed. Assets were frozen, and the land rezoning proposal was withdrawn. Karen, meanwhile, was in custody, cooperating with investigators. Leo Withers mysteriously disappeared, but Jack and the neighbors stayed vigilant. The final twist came when Mike called Jack. "Jack, you need to see this." On the screen was a new video, a body cam from a federal agent. It showed a stash of documents uncovered in a storage locker, tied to the ring's leader. Among them, a ledger with payments not just for land deals, but bribery payments to city officials, including those Jack thought were allies. The fight for Cedar Creek wasn't just local politics. It was corruption that stretched far beyond the white picket fences. Jack looked down at his hounds, Boomer, Duke, and Tilly. They weren't just dogs. They were guardians, and as long as they were by his side, Jack knew he wouldn't stop until the truth was out. The sun was low over Cedar Creek Estates, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. But Jack Doyle felt the storm was just beginning to clear. After weeks of digging, threats, and late-night stakeouts, the truth was finally surfacing, and the community was ready to fight for its future. Jack sat on his porch, Boomer and Duke resting at his feet, Tilly watching the street with unwavering focus. The dogs were exhausted but alert, their keen senses still scanning for danger. Then his phone buzzed. Mike's voice came through, tense but excited. "Jack, we just got a warrant to search the last location, the CEO's private office for Granite Asset Services." Jack knew what that meant. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Within hours, the raid revealed mountains of evidence, offshore accounts, forged contracts, and files linking local officials to bribes. Among the documents, one name stood out, well-known state senator, someone Jack had trusted. The media exploded overnight. Jack found himself the reluctant face of a scandal that shook not only Cedar Creek, but the entire state. At the same time, Karen's trial began. The once powerful HOA president now sat in a courtroom, stripped of her facade, but Jack's mind was elsewhere. He knew the fight wasn't over with one arrest, one investigation, because corruption was a hydra cut off one head, and 2 more appeared. One evening, as Jack walked the perimeter of his yard, Duke suddenly stopped, ears perked. Tilly barked sharply. Jack froze. A figure emerged from the shadows. A woman. Her face was familiar. It was Nora Lotman. "I have something to show you," she whispered. She handed him a small envelope. Inside were photos. This time, not of Cedar Creek, but of another neighborhood. Another HOA. Another Karen. Jack's heart sank. The corruption was spreading, but this time, Jack wasn't alone. The community had rallied. Neighbors who once ignored quiet disputes were now watching, questioning, fighting back. Jack looked down at his hounds. They had led him here, through threats, lies, and danger. And now, as the sun set on Cedar Creek Estates, Jack knew one thing for sure. The fight for justice would never be over. Because as long as people like Karen tried to hide behind power, the hounds would keep barking, and he would keep listening. Thank you for following this story. If you want to hear more unbelievable HOA battles and justice-served stories, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Your support helps keep these stories alive. And remember, sometimes the quietest neighborhood hides the loudest secrets.